Good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. Welcome to the second Knowledge Management webinar of 2020. As you all know, due to COVID-19, we've transitioned to a virtual meeting. And so today's webinar focus is building a business case for knowledge management. Next. Before we get started, we'd like to thank our premier sponsors for their generous support for this session: AECOM, Bentley Systems, HNTB, Jacobs, and WSP. We appreciate their support, without which many of our activities could not go on. Next. So as I mentioned, this is the second of our series of webinars on knowledge management. After today, we still have two more, one on Wednesday, October 14th, and the second on Wednesday, December 9th. So we certainly welcome everyone to join us as you are today. Again, the information is on the Knowledge Management Committee's website at the address there at the bottom. If you missed that, you can always Google us, or you can wait to the end of the slides where there is the information again. Next. In order to keep the webinar flowing, all attendees will be muted during the call. You can, once we get into the Q&A session, we will unmute you as appropriate. If you're joining us and you haven't entered the audio pin to control your audio functions, you can enter the audio pin at any time by entering pound, your pin that was given to you at registration, and pound. During the course of the webinar, if you have any questions, please submit your questions via texting into the question box on the panel there, the navigation panel, or you can raise your hand, and when the time comes, we'll acknowledge you. The presentation will be recorded, and the slides actually are now available for downloading again on the navigation panel. With that, I would like to turn the time over to Jez Arroway from Idaho, who will serve as our moderator for this afternoon. Jez?
Hello, everyone. I would like to start off by thanking our committee today. The committee has been working very hard to bring you relevant content that will enrich your lives. We want to share with you tips, tricks, and best practices for knowledge management, which is what we have kept in mind as we have developed this webinar series for you. So welcome and thank you for attending today. Next slide, please. So welcome. We really do appreciate your time and attendance. We know that you have busy lives and a lot of things that are going on, especially in these very interesting times. And we appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us today. Today, we will continue our knowledge management journey, building upon the 4 pillars of people, process, technology, and information. We learned a little bit about these things in last webinar, and if you're interested in that, you can find that webinar, which was recorded as well. We have some great presenters today bringing us tips and strategies for building a business case for knowledge management. These are real-world stories. They come from people who are just like you and I, who are working with knowledge management and working with knowledge within our organizations. How organizations approached and developed knowledge management is very interesting and different, and we have a lot of things that we can learn from our presenters today as they share their journeys through knowledge management. We also heard that the group was interested in more interaction, so that's something that we would like to incorporate into the webinar today. We want you to use this as a time to share and learn, but we also feel passionately that these webinars bring us together as a community. This isn't a time for us to work together, to build those community relationships, to build networks and peer resources so that we have some touch points that we can go to as we have questions in our own knowledge management journeys. Building this support network is very important because everybody has a different story and everybody has a different perspective. And the more that we share and build and work with each other, the greater our knowledge base will be. It comes down to the value of knowledge networks. And these webinars are a tool that we can use to build that community. Today we have a tool that is called Mentimeter. And using a very easy platform, it gathers information based around questions and displays it. It's completely anonymous, so feel free to be honest when we answer questions or when we ask you questions. Next slide, please. So let's start off with our very first question today. What AASHTO community are you a member of or a friend of? And if you're not in an AASHTO community, please feel free to tell us what your organization is if you like. Let's do that now. And in order to use the Menti tool, you will go to the Menti website and then input the code, and it should display for us. And while we're waiting for some of the results to come in, I would like to just let everyone know that our chair, Victoria Sheehan, is on the line today with us. And it's nice that she was able to take the time and really help support our cause towards sharing knowledge management with you and building the relationship and knowledge management network. So let's move on to our second question in the Menti tool and see if we can't get some responses there. In your own words, what is your current connection to knowledge management? Everybody has a different way that they approach knowledge management. Is it formal or is it informal? Is it something you're interested in? Is it something that is your formal duty? So what is your current connection to knowledge management? Please use the Menti tool and let us know. These are some really fantastic answers, and I do want to thank all of you for participating today. So if we're ready, why don't we move on to our first presentation from the Utah Department of Transportation. So UDOT, if you would like, why don't you take it away?
Hello, everyone. My name is Lori Economy, and I am with the Employee Development and Safety Group with Utah Department of Transportation. Again, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm just going to take a few minutes at the beginning of the presentation here today to talk to you about UDOT and the path that we've been on quite some time with regards to knowledge management and the journey. My intention here is to paint an honest picture of what it's been like for us to build that business case and to really embrace knowledge management within our organization. And my hope in sharing this story with you all is that it will encourage you to share your experiences. It's been a tough journey for us, and I think that's true for many of us. We tend to have a hard time getting some traction going and getting everybody moving in the same direction when it comes to knowledge management. So next slide, please. Real quick here, I wanted to start out with a graphic that kind of tells the story, and maybe even will allow some of you to kind of catch a vision of how you might go about it if you haven't already begun this journey. Really with that call to action, and This is something that we took some time to kind of get going, which is the call to action of what does that look like. As you look at this graphic, you'll see that we spent a lot of time here in building this case and exploring the value for UDOT, trying to align business practices and our functions, and using these stories from the challenges that we have had in order to get everybody on the same page. So as you kind of move deeper into there, you'll into the next level down, the next row of developing a KM strategy. This is kind of where we are now. As a result of the small actions that we've been taking, which I'm going to talk about here in just a few minutes, we recognize that the lack of coordination and intentional approach to knowledge management was creating some confusion for our employees. And so now we have gained enough momentum that we're kind of moving on to develop a strategy. And that's what we've been working on probably in the last year or so. And we're going to spend a little bit of time here talking about that in a few minutes. So I'm going to get quickly to where we want to land, which is that we get to a spot where we are sustaining a knowledge management practice, and that we have a dynamic KM practice going on, and that it's a value and it's embedded within our organization. You know, the business case for us started with really this call to action and building that. We've been moving towards 3D plans and designs and digital delivery for projects. Additionally, our executive director asked for 100% paperless DOT, and that in and of itself creates a need for a digital workplace. And so this, along with some retirements and other turnover challenges that we've been facing, has created a more active engagement in our KM practices. And now we're transitioning to those next phases. So next slide, please. So this slide here shows a draft form of our current and always evolving description of KM for UDOT. And for the purpose of the webinar, I also wanted to kind of just show where the people, process, information, and technology tends to fall within the activities you see here in the box. Over the last 8 to 10 years or so, we've been really willing as an organization to focus on the learning function within our department. And you'll see that there within the motivation. And that is really what my position is focused on. And it's something that we can easily hold on to and people can see and visualize what we need to do. And as we've tried to create that more robust learning environment, it highlighted the need for KM practices with respect to workflow, technology, and communication efforts. Like, for example, as the employee development team would go out and start to build training and engage with groups, it would become evident pretty quickly that we lacked, consistent processes and that a lot of things weren't written down. And really that knowledge lived in the experienced employees who were retiring. And so when we went to build training, we kind of ran around in circles a little bit. And so this really elevated the challenges that we've been having with workflow and even technology. Just recently, as I stated in the last year or so, we've been started to talk about a more strategic role of KM in the department, because we found that as we started to grow our learning function, that many groups or pockets within the organization were duplicating efforts for knowledge sharing, and we were creating duplicate job procedures, on-the-job learning activities, and nothing was consistent. And so as you can imagine, this created some confusion for employees as they began to move into new positions and rotate throughout the department, and as we've hired on new employees into the department. So what started out, this is as a result of maybe a grassroots effort, and then realizing the duplication of effort, we have become more willing in the last little bit to be more strategic in our approach to KM. That being said, all the uncoordinated activities, really have moved us towards that integrated and collaborative approach to KM. And, by no means are we where we want to be, but we're definitely moving more and more. This description that you see here, we've really just come to in the last month or two. So that's how fast this is evolving within our organization. Next slide, please. So real quick, we just wanted to kind of show you for purposes of how long we've been at this and still how much work I guess we have to do, honestly. This is a timeline associated with UDOT's historical attempts and intentional coordinated timeline initiatives. The journey started for UDOT, as you can see, back in 2012. It was actually Lori Dowling, some of you may remember, who attended a presentation. I think Lenny was actually giving that presentation or a part of it. And she came back and wrote a problem statement, which led to an NCHRP scan, and that's 12-04. It's available out there now. And they were really trying to understand KM and the impacts of knowledge loss within the DOT. And so from that point in 2012, it hit the radar, but we've kind of stumbled around a bit. And it led to the hiring of my position and creating a more centralized employee development and employee success function, really talking about our employees and this, their experience that they have at UDOT. We did things like knowledge interviews and some screen captures here or there, but we really didn't have a comprehensive approach to it. So as we created a more intentional focus on this, it's kind of just continued to grow. Along the way, we've applied for stick funding on a couple of different projects. We participated in the findability study that was also an NCHRP study. And currently, in the last year or so, applied for some stick funding that led us to our current knowledge management efforts. So at UDOT, whenever we want to add FTEs or grow a group or division, we have to go into the governor's office and create a business case to ask for really a building block to be added to the organization. And so there's a process that needs to take place. And this is where we're at right now, is kind of going through that and building the business case. So at some point we can go ask for possibly more FTEs to help guide this KM function within our department. So this journey's been pretty slow, as you can see, but it does show where we are today. And for me, leading the learning function within the organization, I've been pretty intentional about what I'm trying to accomplish and know where I need to land. But it has been a pretty big challenge to get everyone in leadership roles within our organization to see the necessity for a coordinated effort. That it's not just something that the learning group can do on our own, that we need everybody else to kind of show up and collaborate and be intentional about this need for KM. So next slide. So we just wanted to take another quick poll. We've kind of shared with you some of the challenges we've had along the way, some stops and starts that we've had in trying to build our KM strategy within UDOT. I'd like you to just take a moment and share with us how long you guys within your organization or your current position have been discussing or working on knowledge management within your organization. You can go ahead and go to the Menti.com and you'll see the code there at the top of the screen and enter that in. We'll start to see some results pulling up on the screen. So looking, there's some of us, it looks like what I have in there so far. Interesting number is about 7% of us on the phone have been looking 10 years or more. Oh, it's rising up there just a little bit to 9%. 16 are saying we're not currently doing that, 1 to 3 years, 3 to 5 years. So that shows you kind of where we're all at. I know for us, it's been an interesting journey to try to get everybody talking about it and moving in the same direction. I guess, Lenny, can you see if they're still responding is coming in, or should we move on?
I can't see who's still responding. It comes up on the screen live. But why don't we move on to the next slide? Okay. That's very interesting. I love the distribution.
Yeah. So the next slide, please, then. So lastly, I just want to share to you, this is kind of where we've landed in the last little bit as we've begun to tell the why. Inside of our organization, we've started to talk about it in comparison to long-range planning for the transportation system. We found that this really spoke to our leadership in the same way that they kind of approach long-range planning. That, you know, there's certain issues that we know we have to take care of right away, but there might be some bigger issues we know are 7 to 10 years out or something along those lines. So as we started to paint this picture, it's helped everybody kind of get on board. And so we've kind of started to talk about it in terms of immediately and right now, what do we need to do to deal with our current strategy holes in our way? What are the current challenges we're facing, and what do we need to do to address those? And then at the same time, not taking our eye off what that looks like 10 years from now. And as we go to develop a strategy, what we need to do inside of the organization to make that happen. You know, identifying whether that's an enterprise architecture or business architecture, and that long-term strategy. So in order to do that, as I told you in the last fall, we kind of got together a group of division leaders and started off on this journey. And as a part of that, we chose to invite Utah Valley University and the Woodbury School of Business, which is located in Utah's Silicon Slopes, right there at the point of the mountain. If anybody knows Salt Lake City, we've had a lot of tech companies that have located campuses, large campuses there. And Utah Valley University is also located just right there. Their MBA program has actually a consulting arm, and we found them to be in the plan that they submitted to be very helpful in trying to help us determine what our long-term strategy should be in a long-range plan for KM. So we're fortunate here today to have one of our graduate students who actually just graduated last week. Congratulations, Sandy, as you step in. She's going to tell us how the MBA program is helping us and what they have found out in partnering with UDOT organization and doing some interviews and some literature review, etc. So with that in mind, I'm going to toss it over to Sandy Cook, who is an MBA and a graduate from the master's program with Utah Valley University. Sandy?
Thanks a lot, Lori. So if you go to the next slide, you'll be able to see what UVU and UDOT came up with for, nope, just back one slide. Be able to see what they came up with for their plan for the 2 years that they're going to work together. Again, I am graduated now, so I don't get to actually see the ending, but I did get to be a part of the very, very beginning part, which is the research into it. Next slide. So my group was chosen to work with UDOT on only that first section of just the research section. It's part of the collaboration between them. This was a great opportunity for my team because none of us had a clue whatsoever about what knowledge management even was. So first thing we did was delve into, of course, academic research, because that's what we do. And then the next thing we did is we started to pull back and say, okay, now let's look at different industries out there, not just all the transportations, but we looked into the health field, we looked into the hotel management field, we looked into several different fields to see how they were handling their knowledge management on such large scales. Then we got to do the fun part. Now I know everyone thinks I'm crazy, but I do think this is the fun part. We wanted to look into next how UDOT employees felt about their knowledge management. So we got to do interviews. This is my favorite part. We sat down and we got to sit and do cross-sectional interviews with more than 50 employees covering multiple ranges of, or levels, I should say, and also across all 4 regions for UDOT. It was a lot of fun. I know I keep saying that, but it was a lot of fun. We got a lot of really good information out of it that we were able to tear into to try to figure out where UDOT is currently with their knowledge management, as well as how they can get to their next step. The questions we asked were both to gather quantitative data and qualitative data, because quantitative data is great when you want to do graphs and charts and to get a really quick picture. But if you want to delve into what that picture is showing you, you got to get the qualitative stuff. And so we did. We actually asked, okay, so when you started your position, how did you get your information? How did you look for it? All kinds of information like that. Before I go into the results of all those interviews, let's go to the next slide really quick. if you look at this slide, and I'm sure all the different transportations are different, but UDOT specifically has a workforce that is, it's aging. It's getting ready to go on to the retirement stage. And it looks like 34% of them are over 51. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see that there is actually 22% that could be retired anytime in the next 5 years. That is a lot of brilliant information that these employees have in their heads that are going to disappear when they move on. And this is where we found our issue, is when we asked the employees what they felt about how knowledge management was, or what knowledge management was at UDOT, they gave us these responses. Can you go to the next slide, please? It's mostly inside people's heads. We asked them, where do you go for information? And they did say UDOT website or a Google Team Drive, but 62% of them go to other employees when they need help with a project, when they need help with finding a document, when they have a question about anything, they go to other employees first, which is amazing because UDOT has a wonderful climate for asking information. They encourage it. They want you to ask questions, and they're more than willing to stop and help you with stuff. That's wonderful. The problem that we are looking at is that if all of that brilliant knowledge is in their heads, when all those brilliant people retire and they leave, they're leaving with that knowledge. And we need to find a way to get that knowledge out of them and documented or shared or trained with other people so that we don't lose out and we don't have any holes or gaps when the new people fill in. Another thing we found was that even though people think it's all in other people's heads, and people feel very isolated because they feel like they're in pockets. They're like, well, I know where my information is. I don't know where the other team's information is or where the other region's information is. It's not being shared across all the regions. They do feel that it's improving. Right now, they are excited. They are very excited that UDOT is putting such an emphasis on knowledge management. They love talking to us because that means that they feel listened to. And they understand that UDOT wants to be able to improve everything for everybody. So they're loving it. They're saying it's improving and we love it. If you go to the next slide, one of the things we talked about was the risks. What if you do nothing? What if UDOT's like, you know what, we're working, we don't have time, we don't have money, because that's how organizations sometimes are. You just don't have the ability to do anything right now. What are the risks? Well, one of the questions we asked one of the employees was, when you got hired into your current position, how long did it take you before you felt proficient in this position? We gathered that and we found that on average, it was 12 months before people felt proficient. Now, using a complicated formula that we sent on to UDOT, it's for the employee lifetime value calculation. We determined that if UDOT could utilize a bunch the KM tools that they're looking at, and if they could cut that time down to 6 months instead of 12 months, that would increase the value the employees are giving to UDOT by about 43%, which is amazing. Another thing that we found is, like I was saying with the retiring, is when they leave, you lose the information. UDOT is working on finding ways to capitalize on this information, and they know that this is an issue. So that is one of the risks that we put in there. Another question we had asked from the interview process was whether the employees, or where the employees go to find their information when they know that there's a document in existence. They just need to find it. Where do you go to find it? And again, like I said, 62% of them go to other employees after a while, but first they do search the website or they'll search their Team Drive folders. However, if after all these search engines are finished, they just recreate the document, which means you're paying someone to redo the same work that is already done and somewhere else in the organization. This not only puts out the fact that you're paying someone to redo something, this puts out the fact that you now have several different versions of the same document. They can try to recreate it perfectly, but then they save it to where they think it should be, or they save it onto their computer, and it does not get shared across all regions or even through all employees. Some of the information is so localized that it's like having pockets. Region 1 doesn't share with Region 2 as well, Region 3 and 4. It's very much each region, and sometimes within the regions, their own departments are like their own little islands. They keep things in their team folders, but it doesn't get shared out, which is something that we found and we put in that needs to get addressed in a later version with the next MBA group. Next slide. Okay, so that was a very quick, brief run through of what the MBA came up with during our section of it. I know that we were just the very first section, but Elena's going to talk about the next few sections and where they're going to take the research information that we gave them. Elena?
Thanks, Sandy. So yes, as Sandy mentioned, we just finished the summer semester with the students from UVU. We're getting ready to have a new set of consulting students come in the fall. And where we intend to go with this set of students is to really look at identifying those layers of knowledge. What do we need to be capturing as part of UDOT's structure? And then looking at building that framework, our business architecture, understanding our people, the processes that they have, who their customers are, and what they're producing and what those outcomes are, and looking for a strategy on how we will go about collecting that information in an organized manner. And then in spring, we'll have another set of students who will actually be helping us develop those system and process mapping, identifying who are those key people that we need to make sure we're documenting their processes, and starting to get into the work of designing that. And then in the summertime, what we hope to do is find a couple of pilot projects, groups that we can take and test what we've developed in the spring, and go through that testing phase, make sure that the structure is solid. After, we'll make some tweaks and move into the fall where we can modify and refine that. So that's where we're at with the students. If you'll go to the next slide, we have a poll question for everyone. What is your organization's biggest challenge with knowledge management? It looks like we're about split on designing and implementing, staffing, resources. Yes, all of the above, right? All right, well, that concludes UDOT section. Yes, Lenny?
I was just going to say, for those that have entered other, if you would be willing to enter into the chat log what some of those challenges are, that would be helpful for the Committee on Knowledge Management to consider as we're building our repertoire.
Thanks, Lenny. Well, I will turn the time over to you, Lenny.
All right. Hello, everyone. I'm Lenny Oman. I am the knowledge strategist with the Washington State Department of Transportation. And we will move into a recap of the evolving case for knowledge management at WashDOT. And to start with, I want to take you back to 2003. The reason for this is that it's easy for us to think about where we are today with our technology and the resources and tools we have, and forget what we were working with at the time we might have been developing a program or project. So back in 2003, BlackBerries were just hitting the marketplace with some of their early versions, which was a big deal, and only executives could have a BlackBerry. Yahoo was the search engine of choice in a lot of cases, so that may seem a surprise today. And they were just starting to use the Yahoo Slurp web crawler, so web crawling was starting to become more common. Ask Jeeves, just to take a few of us old timers back to the beginning, which Ask Jeeves had been a natural language process for trying to make the web environment more user-friendly for people to use. Today it's called ask.com, but it was declining in use at this time. And knowledge management was sort of at the beginning to get to the end of a phase of technology is the solution. Technology is the way we're going to manage knowledge. And knowledge management systems were not realizing the benefit that had been advertised. Harvard Business Review has an article at that time on the brokering model, which is more about connecting people that have contextual relevance so that they can begin to collaborate together. So that is kind of the scenario at that point. I was beginning at this time. I had just been hired as a research director for the Department of Transportation for WashDOT, and I shortly after I started, I was asked to manage the library, the WashDOT library. I had two subject matter experts come to me and say, the library is in decline. There's another legislative proposal to cut it further. I've talked to people that are managing the contract we have with the Washington State Library, and they're not inclined to fight for it. And we rely on it. And these were two subject matter experts from the performance division. So they did rely on data and information for their work. I approached my boss, and we together went to the division director for that was over the library contract at that time. And with that meeting, he immediately said, yeah, it's yours. At the change of the biennium, it's yours. And so I was delighted that we were able to bring the library in, but I had a lot to learn. And from there, I will take you into the beginning of my journey with KM. It really is a little bit of a personal journey and then an organizational journey at the same time. In 2004, I was at the Mystic, Connecticut AASHTO Research Advisory Committee meeting. This is all of the research directors from the state DOTs. And at this, there was a session on information management that Sandy Tucker and Dave Johnson, Sandy Larson, and Nina McLaughlin presented, and they represented Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Texas, the TTI. And they talked about the Midwest Transportation Knowledge Network, and I had never heard about knowledge networks before. Nina McLaughlin was talking about a proposal for a transportation pooled fund library connectivity study. And she shared as part of that presentation that employees spend up to 35% of their time looking for information, and that searchers looking for information only find what they're looking for about 50% of the time, unless they're an information professional. In my career, I've been asked to lead a lot of projects to prioritize environmental protection and restoration activities. And these findings resonated with me. And when you do find information, getting it to be able to be used together can often be very challenging. So when I heard this, it was just like, yes, somebody's thinking about this, and it is a real problem. And since then, I've continued to see statistics about this, and Gartner had a comment that it's up to 50% of the time that people are looking for information. You also find comments about this is not true, and it's not true in every case. If you have a highly repetitive task that has good information organization around it, it doesn't take you 35% of your time to find information. But if you're doing something that's more research or one-off work or new activities or not well structured, it can take you a long time to find what you're looking for to do your work. So this was my epiphany for knowledge management, and it was also felt like a homecoming for me. These were topics that I cared about and knew about, and so I was really happy to see that there were people thinking about it and beginning to work on this activity. So I'm curious, what inspires you to be here today? Why are you interested in the KM journey? If you take a moment to complete this poll. And I will do it myself. Cool. Great. Yeah, resources in disarray, relationships, access to information, efficiency, all good comments, and they speak to me too. And we will provide the polling results. So if you haven't entered yet and are not on screen, we will be capturing that for you in our recording and in our slides. Okay, I'm going to move along in the interest of time. So at WSDOT, the knowledge management journey, oops, excuse me, I've got too many screens. Let's go back. One more. Come on, back up, Menti. Apologies. We just had the Menti screen presenting and moderating at the same time, or challenging sometimes. Okay, so at WSDOT, we've had a few generations of the business case for knowledge management, and I am not going to pretend that this was all mapped out and intentional to start with. This has developed very organically, and it's really been a personal passion because of hearing about what was being done by Wisconsin DOT and partners in the Midwest, and has grown from there. So I will take you through some of the phases that we've had and the approaches that I've used, and I really appreciate what UDOT has presented as tools that I can use in my next steps. I'm going backwards. So in 2004, after that presentation, we did join in the Library Connectivity Transportation Pooled Fund study that was started by Wisconsin DOT. And there have been iterations of that pooled fund project that have moved forward. And I think there's currently some discussion about continuing that. In 2005, TRB held a policy study. So these are the more formal studies that can make recommendations to Congress. And the policy study was on the future of transportation information. It was created through AASHTO Standing Committee on Highways, funding a scoping study about transportation information. And this project led to Special Report 284, implementing transportation, it is about transportation knowledge networks. This is the wrong title here. transportation knowledge networks, the future for transportation. And in that meeting, I met Gary Allen from Virginia DOT. They had a knowledge management program. I also was able to meet people from outside of the transportation sector in agriculture, medicine, and library science. And that work really helped me build some connections and some better understanding of what knowledge networking could be, and began my understanding of knowledge management as a practice beyond the explicit information, the documentation that we have in data or in narrative literature. And so I brought this information back to WSDOT, and I began to talk to people about how is the information flow working for you? Are you able to access the information you need to do your job? Would you like to have better access to some resources that you can't get to right now? And to begin to understand what our work environment was. What I found from people is a strong interest in it at the worker level. I would say some of the management and leadership levels, because they don't spend their days doing the work, they may be guiding the work, but they're not actively necessarily putting the pieces together, don't always have the same experience of data and information that people trying to do the analysis and the evaluation have. So some of the things that I heard was the server space is a problem. We don't have enough storage, which today seems kind of crazy, but back then was a big deal. We have inconsistent information, and we're not using the same authoritative sources for our decision making that we're doing. We can't find what we need. Search success for employees and contractors, information access was a real problem. And people were very interested in a new way to do this. They wanted to be supportive of what we were doing. We did some presentations with our senior managers in the department, and we also held workshops with subject matter experts for different types of information resources. Virginia DOT had at the time a knowledge officer named Maureen Hammer, and she came out and visited with us, spent a couple days with us, and that was very helpful and very informative. We were talking about lessons learned databases, organizational network analysis that they had done, information interviews, and just the general concept of knowledge in the organization and how we could be managing that. The Western Transportation Knowledge Network also started during this time period, and WSDOT played a leadership role in that. Our librarian chaired the first iteration of this group, and it began to build some connections with that community. And if you have not yet had a chance to work with your librarians very much, or if you don't have one, I'm very sad for you, but if you haven't had a chance to work with your librarians, I encourage you to do so. Library science is very important in the work that we're doing in knowledge management. And the connections that these folks have formed over the years through the library connectivity study and just their natural way of working is tremendous. I'm on the TranLib listserv, and they're getting information from people every day that they don't have access to at their own fingertips. So it's pretty amazing to look at. We also took the policy study, and a group of us built a problem statement for the next generation. How are we actually going to go about implementing knowledge networks? And there is a report, NCHRP 643, on implementing transportation knowledge networks that includes some of the building blocks for your information environment. The Standing Committee on Knowledge Management also did a survey in 2008 following that report, and 85% thought that transportation knowledge networks would be helpful in the work that they supported. And that led to a next step that you'll see coming up. So that was during this. I would characterize this as information access. Really, the focus is on that one pillar, with light touches about the people side, but not much on process and technology, only as it related to the information flow. In 2009, the report had been published. We were still marketing, implementing transportation knowledge networks. WSDOT began to look at more of the people aspects of it. So as I mentioned, Maureen had talked to us about organizational network analysis. And this is a process where you're looking at who's talking to who, how effective is that conversation. And as you begin to look at a network map of that, you see who's in the center, who are the common people that are really engaged and a lot of people are going to, who might be on the periphery or a lone wolf off on the side. And what we found, so we looked at 2 networks in our department, one for the tribal network that supports work we're doing with tribes and when we're on tribal lands. And then we also, that was a functioning network, but it had some issues to resolve. And then we also looked at climate change. We had a new committee that was broadly, had broad representation from the department, and we wanted to look at what information did they need and how can we move forward with improvements for that. For the tribal network, we identified some improvements that they can make in this practice. They call it interventions. So there were some interventions that they could make, such as titling. Everybody had the same title, but they didn't have the same role. And so there was real lack of clarity about who made decisions, who set policy, and who was doing other types of work. And we also recommended communities of practice. As we were doing this work, just a quick note is that our real estate services director called me and said, I shouldn't be part of this survey. I'm going to skew the results. I'm not important in this. I had done a knowledge interview with the tribal liaison in the department, and I knew that real estate services was one of their critical partners. And so I encouraged him to fill out the survey. And as we looked at the results, we found that he was one of the more central contacts for people, but he didn't know it. And so one of the mitigation strategies we recommended was alerting people to the fact that the project that they were working on was triggering our tribal connections and that we needed to be thinking about it from that perspective. So during this period, as I mentioned, we did more of the people side. We did host a webinar, so Virginia DOT, Maryland State Highway Administration, and FTA all talked about their knowledge management work. And Lori Dabling from Utah was a participant in that in the audience, and she took that and decided to write a problem statement for the domestic scam program, which was really awesome. And we also established the TRB task force on knowledge management. So those relationships I talked about beginning to develop with the policy study were really important because Gary Allen was on the standing committee for research. He was very supportive of we were trying to build both an AASHTO and a TRB knowledge management community at the time. And Neil Peterson was on standing committee of research at the time. He was also the Maryland State Highway Administration director. And they were champions for knowledge management work. And we had others from the consulting sector as well as from other state DOTs. So we did successfully create the task force on knowledge management at TRB at that time. And we began to work on the AASHTO community. We started with a thought to have a special committee on knowledge management, and then working with the standing committee on highways, that evolved to be a resolution to create a special committee on workforce planning and development. Now, if you were in the transportation agencies at this time, you know that we started to face an economic downturn in 2012. WSDOT specifically lost about 1,100 positions at that time. We had to let people go, and it really set back some of the opportunities for us to move forward because everybody was trying to figure out what do we have the resources to continue to do, and there was a lot of transition going on. So lots of activities, a little bit more people focused, and the messaging started to be more about how can we afford not to do this? We need efficiency, we need to save time, we need to save money. Helping people find information they need to do their work more quickly is a productivity benefit, and it will help us improve decision support and more consistency in our decisions, less rework if we do this. So those were some of the changing business case messages that were happening at that time. In 2013, the domestic scan for knowledge management happened at the end of the year. WSDOT started an enterprise information governance group. So from our previous work on information management, I had met someone from our data management services group, and I said to him, I think we ought to curate our data in the same way we curate our library collections so that we can access the information we need. He said, well, that's why I hired a person with a Master of Library and Information Science degree so that he could help us build the WSDOT data catalog. And the data catalog was already up and functioning at that point. So that has begun to develop a great partnership with data management services for me personally. And I think we have a couple representatives on the phone today. And Andy Everett, many of you may know from our data catalog because he's done a lot of presentations about that. We still have more investment and work to do there, but we have made a lot of progress. We also began to work with, again, the AASHTO Standing Committee on Research to really talk about what do we need to do to improve information management in our state DOTs. And we had a quick look at some of the research need statements from TRB's RNS database and built an information and knowledge management research framework and created 3 problem statements. And all 3 of those problem statements were funded at that time, and the results are out and beginning to be in use. And I will give you a list of the resources for the connections that we have here. At the TRB Task Force on Knowledge Management, we had a gentleman from the Netherlands come to our Knowledge Management Committee meeting, task force meeting, and he presented this knowledge tree. And I know you can't see it clearly here. It's in Dutch, you couldn't read it anyway. But what I would like you to note about it is there are these vertical lines, and those represent different business areas of business needs. So like they have marine transport and surface transportation in their organization. And then these boxes on the side were the different business areas that do work to support that. As is typical, I think, in a lot of our agencies, people think their work is unique and they're the only ones that use it. But as Lori mentioned, it's the connections across some of this work that is also important. And what they've done here is to say for this business area, they have little branches that come out from their core trunk of the tree that show the connections by color with the different business areas. And what you see is a lot more connection than people understand we have in our organizations. And this has always been in my mind. I've been trying to find a way to visualize this for WSDOT, and we have some of the materials to do that with. I just don't have the visualization skills and need to work with someone on that. We also were working with our Secretary's office on a lean internet project proposal at this time. Virginia DOT had recreated their intranet site as a knowledge management resource for the department, and we wanted to do the same at WSDOT. Started to go pretty well. Our chief of staff left the department. We had a brand new communications assistant director who was in charge of the web environment, and she was ramping up, and that was a change we still haven't quite recovered from yet. But so at this time we were starting to look at information management, how much of a typical organization's information content is not managed. 80%, that's huge. Up to 35, still we're carrying this message forward about productivity regarding time spent looking for information. We were starting to look more at our HR data about the potential for retirements. And we had recently experienced a lot of loss of employees, people leaving because they could see our budget environment wasn't good in 2012 and we weren't going to recover right away. We had early retirement offered. We had people being riffed. And so there were lots of workplace transitions at this time. And we also did a little bit of reorganization. And every time an employee moves, every time an organization changes, there is a high probability of knowledge loss and a need to rebuild connections and knowledge flow. So we definitely, as an organization, we're experiencing that, but we couldn't get ahead of knowledge management fast enough to really have much of an impact at that time. So that's a little bit of you know, we tried to catch the wave to say we need to do this, and it was helpful, but it was also a moment of, gosh, if we'd only been more prepared, we could have been helpful in this environment to know what is core mission work, what are those critical resources that we must retain. A message from Kraft Food through this, they were part of our domestic scan on knowledge management, is they were splitting their business in two. Somebody had bought part of it, and they did knowledge management to help do a risk assessment for the information they needed to retain, and then also to look at the unique positions that they needed to really document, because they were at much higher risk if that person were to leave. And sometimes those are unexpected leavings. So very important message from them. So we're getting more people involved, but still not a formal program at this time. At the very end of 2014, we had a new division director. I was in a new division called Engineering Policy and Innovation. And at the end of the year, she asked if I would like to do a pilot project on knowledge management. So I left the position of research director and became a solo person working on knowledge management in a temporary acting role. And I also want to mention that from the domestic scan on knowledge management, Virginia DOT had talked about this paper on the 3 ways of knowing, and I was fascinated by it. And then I had the opportunity to meet Dr. Jean Shin, who was also employed in the knowledge management program at Virginia at the time. They're both now at Battelle. But he had written this paper on the 3 dimensions of knowing, and it was a different way of thinking about knowledge management for me, about thinking about how do people think, how do we know something, how do you know? And so he talked about how we think is one dimension. What you see is a product of the way you learn to think about it. You know, my mother has taught me that this was I guess mauve might be the color, and it's been reinforced through other teachers and so on. But I've learned that there's the who we are. So I grew up on a farm. We grew up without a lot. That definitely is part of my personality. I'm scrappy. I'm a country girl, and you can see that in the way I respond, and my degree of formality isn't as high in a lot of cases. But I have an environmental background. I have a veterinary science background. I've come to transportation from those perspectives, and it certainly has created a different way of me to think about and look at the work that I do, and often can, you know, because I don't have the same background, can lead to some moments of confusion and a need for making sure we're on the same page. And then how we remember, this was an interesting one for me. The other 2 made a lot of sense, but why would memory be so important? But memory is really, how do we think about something, and what have we learned about it that we're going to bring to our work today? So think about the 2003 and the fact that Blackberries were just on market, and we really didn't have a lot of the tools we have today. So declarative memories are the factual and easy to say and document, things we can write down and keep with us in our files. The procedural is that muscle memory, or I like the example of how do you tell a joke? I am not a comedian. I could tell you the joke, but it wouldn't be funny in a lot of cases. People know how to tell jokes that are good at it, and those that are successful comedians. And that's, how do you describe that? How do you talk about it beyond timing and emphasis of words? But there is something that's innate in us that really helps people do that. So that's the procedural knowledge. And another term for that would be operational knowledge. How do we actually do something? And those are the things that are often in people's heads that we haven't captured. So in 2015 through 19, and I'll be wrapping up here shortly, we received a grant from Federal Highway Administration for a project titled Deploying Practical Solutions Using Lean Techniques and Knowledge Management. And my boss was really supportive of this because it helped us address aspects of our work that we often didn't fund. So we were shifting as a department to practical solutions, which is a data-driven approach, a more collaborative approach. And we were talking about how do we do design, what does planning do in that process, but the information flow, the people connections, the knowledge flow were not things that we would typically be stepping back to talk about. And the grant was intended to help us do that. So we have 11 reports that have come out of this. I'm not going to belabor a lot about this. I have talked about this in other presentations, and we'll make some links to those. But this was where we began to look at people, process, and data and information. There was a light touch on technology and applications. Like we have over 400 applications that support our project development lifecycle, what we call the practical solutions lifecycle. And as Lori mentioned earlier, the work done in planning is often not accessible downstream. So there's a gap in knowledge flow that we identified as one of the things that we could work on to improve this in the future. So we do have a lot of recommendations that have come out of this project, and those are, the publications were just out last year, so that's where my work is today. We were also, at this time, the business case for knowledge management began to look at leveraging the governor's initiative for the integration of lean management into our business practices. We did not have a lean program when the grant proposal went in. The person, our first lean manager was hired within the first 5 months of after we got the grant. And so we were able to start partnering with her. The knowledge strategist position I'm in became permanent. And I also received an invitation to the Knowledge Leaders Council. This is a group of public-private knowledge managers, and it's a small group that's intended to be confidential and to support each other. What was very interesting for me in this is we had federal partners, federal agency partners, and public sector or private sector companies. There are no consultants in it, no academics in this environment. And it's intended to be a place where you can openly and honestly talk about challenges and activities. And we like to say that the private sector has it a lot better than us on getting some things done. I would say yes sometimes and no sometimes. There's a lot of similarities in the challenges that we face. And it was kind of nice to hear that the experiences are true across our organizations, and to pick up some tips and tricks from them on what they have done to try to build their programs. So we were looking at other organizations for lessons at this time, leveraging the governor's initiative, doing pilot projects because I had been asked to prove there was an information problem in the department by 2 of our assistant secretaries. We were looking at the handoffs for efficiency. We had a strategic plan that had included a workforce initiative on reducing rework, and then laying the foundation for some of our enterprise approach to information management in the department. And but still not a formal charter for knowledge management, backgrounding still. So now we're at 2020, and I am working on trying to put our information from the AID project into more of a roadmap for development. I love Lori's illustration of that at the beginning, and I'm going to be trying to borrow that and put my information into a similar format. We do have a new version of our data governance team. Previously we've had several iterations of enterprise data or enterprise information governance. But today we have a small team of people whose responsibility is for information management in the department. And we are looking to use a framework for governance from either the DAMA data management body of knowledge or the ARMA information governance body of knowledge. What we're actually looking at doing is how did those 2 fit together? So we're looking at data, records, and publications as a cohesive whole, because the users don't think of them differently. We may think about them differently in our disciplines, but they're not used differently by the users. So that's just getting kicked off. We also are talking about a couple of pilots. We do have a LiDAR, mobile LiDAR data collection initiative that's getting started up, and we're using that to help us learn what to do for data collection and integrating data related resources to our tech suite. And then we have a pilot that we're starting to queue up on a business domain. So we're thinking about, in the past, we've had everybody at the table together on data governance. That didn't work out. So we have tried to have a smaller team that cares about the data governance part of it, and then to work with the business areas on the actual content that they care about, and have them help us look forward for improvements that we can do. I'm working on 2 knowledge books, trying to finish up one that we started through the AID project, and then also was asked by one of our regions if I would help with their office. And that's been really informative and helped me to see how our guidance that we provide from headquarters is or is not helping our people who are trying to implement the work. And then also developing this roadmap for further deployment. So, you know, that I would say now it's a little bit more of an enterprise strategy that's focused on what the business objectives are of the agency, with supporting data-driven decision-making, improving consistency of inputs, providing that organizational efficiency, and really helping us with collaboration internally and externally. And you know, I think for me, we're trying to transform as a department. I think many of our DOTs are. So how do we look at what we want to retain and what we want to, how we enable the change that we're trying to create? And that's where tools like our information resources and our analysis tools are so critically important, but also what people know and how we enable people's ability to share their thoughts and ideas and to create synergy and use the talents of our employees more fully than we are able to today. So it also provides a platform for inclusion. One of the things I'm interested in is multilingual search and navigation of our information resources. World Bank has been able to do that for 26 different languages, and we have 1. You know, so what can we do to really reach out to our constituents that don't speak English? And in 2021, what I'm planning ahead is, you know, what can we do to really try to institutionalize KM as a practice that's going to have some resources going forward, to build a succession plan for knowledge management. I am near the end of my career and making plans for that and trying to leave knowledge behind, and to build a toolkit for knowledge management, a resource people can use to do KM work themselves, because everybody is managing knowledge. And it's just how do we do it that has either intent and strategy to help us as an organization move forward. So reflections, strategies that have worked. I'm not going to read through these because we're limited on time. I will just say one of the biggest challenges for me is I've had a lot of folks that want to partner, but boy, they move. You know, it's so there's a constant education every time I have to step back and say, oops, I lost that person. Now what do I do? So keep it broad. Don't rely on one person, and keep building forward. And staffing is a problem. You know, I have not done all the walking the walk I want to do with marketing and logistics and the work itself, because I'm one person trying to do many things. But you want to catch the opportunities and get some excitement going, and but you have to be careful about how much you say yes to. And what we would like to know is, are there some tools or techniques that you've tried to support knowledge management that you can share with us? What are you finding is working for you? We take a few moments to respond to this poll. And while you're doing that, I wanted to mention too, you'll see in the thread of materials that I have that there's a lot about the things going on nationally. for WSDOT, you know, we've used our national partnerships to help get information developed. So the problem statements on various knowledge and information resources, we've either helped to write, written, or just celebrated problem statements that others have written to help move knowledge management forward, and certainly been very supportive of the communities that are developed so that we have a place to talk. Okay, we got to get my name out of these things because it's not a people thing, but thank you. Yeah, yes, GIS tools are mentioned, you know, the great integrator of information, as we've called that. And, you know, there is a conference APQC does on knowledge management, and I will say there too, just listening to people talk about cognitive science and what's happening with understanding the brain and the human factors of being human has been really fascinating for me as well. Cool. Well, I'm going to move us forward, and I think Lori and I both want to share that while there are challenges in this journey, it's a valuable journey, and it's also a rewarding journey. So one thing I think is a little different is in our work environments, we're often tweaking or operational practices with knowledge management, as we've done with performance management and asset management. There are new practices that we're trying to integrate into the sector. So it's really emergent work, and the timeline isn't operational yet. And our partners may not understand that. So it's helpful to even talk about the fact that this is emergent work and it has a slightly different life cycle and time frame on it. But stay the course, engage with other people interested in the subject, and keep your spirits up, because you'll learn from every bit that you do, whether it works or doesn't work. Oh, and then we also want to give to you, and we won't go through these today. Maureen did a presentation in June, and that is available to you in our resources. But we have a few. These are some of the questions you can ask yourself as you're beginning to build your business case. What does KM mean to your organization? Can you articulate some strategic questions? The more tactical questions, often it's easier to start with a tactical issue because people understand it and they can touch and feel it better. And then where am I going? Those operational questions that you can help yourself answer and your organization answer. And the assessment and evaluation, which is so important to demonstrating value. So one of our last questions, our last question for you is, what's the next step you'll take on your knowledge management journey? I'll answer this one. You've seen some of mine. That's great. Yeah, and if you are, so today, I know we have people from a variety. You didn't get to see it on the poll. For some reason, it wasn't populating to the screen, but we do have people from our AASHTO community, as well as our TRB community, and some outside of transportation. So thank you all for joining us today. You will get information as a follow-up to your registration for the webinar, and be able to see what some of these responses are and have access to the resources. And there's lots of work that has already been done across our state DOTs and outside of our transportation community. And I encourage you to be curious and to engage and to find. And I'm going to move us on to the next slide. Yes, friends of committees, committee members, yeah, this would be great. So we do have a few resources that are linked for you. You'll see Maureen's work and then a few other resources, but this is just the tip of the iceberg, and our communities are working to develop information resources. The TRB, Task Force on Knowledge Management, has just merged with the Library and Information Science for Transportation Committee, and so we are now the Committee on Information and Knowledge Management. So that website is retrenching and figuring out where we're going forward, and our CKM Committee on Knowledge Management website is up and running, but also in a development phase where we're trying to extend our resources and value to our members and our friends. And much of that is public. So I encourage you to start your business case, and to, whether it's an organic start or it's a more planned start, just start where you are and move forward however you can in the organization that you work in. And with that, I'm turning it back to Jez.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back. And well, I should say thank you for welcoming me back. That was really great. I took a lot of great notes during this presentation. We are in the same sorts of similar situations as you all. We are just beginning our KM journey, and so there was a lot of really great information that was presented to us today. We do have a few more minutes, so please, this is the time where you can ask questions. You can ask questions of the presentations today. You can also ask questions of each other if you hear something. So by all means, if you have a question, we would love to hear it. You can either raise your hand in the tool and we will unmute you, or you can put your questions into the question box and we will answer them. So let's open it up. We have 5 more minutes.
Well, I'm going to try to go back and see if I can get back to our representation, since we couldn't show that at the beginning, and see if I can get it to show.
So hello, hey everyone, this is Lori. I am looking here and I am seeing that Claire has a question, but I am not able to figure out how to pull the question up. Can someone on the panel help me find that question?
Will reduce people's use of more active forms of transportation. That's negative. It'll improve personal mobility for people.
Lori, I just to you. Did you get it?
We're having difficulty hearing you.
I love technology. Oh, there it is. I see it. Thank you, Denise. So I think the question, if I'm reading it right, is how do you create champions for KM out of agency execs? I will go ahead and start off. This is something that we've been working really hard on trying to accomplish. And we really did go about trying to tell the story about what our employees are asking for. The one thing about our senior leadership team, the employee experience has become really important to them over the last probably 5, always important, of course, but I would say it's elevated in criticality over the last few years. And so as we start to talk about the retirements and the turnover and looking at folks leaving, and that our new hires are struggling to find the information and to feel like they belong and are included inside of our workplace, that story has really been speaking well. Another thing has been, we've had a couple of knowledge challenges over the last few years that's elevated the need for a more coordinated effort to the top. And so they have started to see it. I think it was Lenny that shared, a lot of times our leaders aren't in the trenches. We joke about it inside of our organization. If somebody in that senior leadership realm asks a question, they have about 5 or 6 of us running around trying to get them the answer. And those of us that are at the working level are the ones that try around, having to run around and get those answers. And so the more and more they start to see those challenges, the more willing they are to recognize it. One of the things at UDOT that has prevented us from wanting to do this is, we pride ourselves in innovation and constantly moving ahead. And so the idea of writing things down, the belief is it slows everybody down. And so we have started to tell a different story about that, which is if we can get them more quickly up to onboarding and knowing what their basic job role is, that they can innovate from there. So that if we're setting that platform and it's pretty quick and they can find everything and they don't have to spend a lot of time wondering if they're getting it right, that they have more time to think creatively and to innovate. So that's how we've done it. I would love to hear from anyone else on the panel or on the call if you guys are interested in answering that.
I'll leave a little space here for others. You hear from me a lot. But I will say at WashDOT, I've always kept leadership aware that I'm working on knowledge management, especially when I'm doing something national that they might hear about. And we've had ebbs and flows of interest in it from our leadership. Really, they're never not supportive, but it's not necessarily something that I'll advocate for. I've been under 3 different administrations doing knowledge management work, and the data piece is tangible to them. So that has been a place I have been able to more successfully engage, and they're listening to some of the productivity challenges and aware of, when we got the FHWA grant, it had to go through the Secretary's office. So we've had some support always at the top, but it's really more the people that are using the information that champion it for us. And I'll leave it with that. Well, you asked about tools, so I'll just say briefing papers, presentations, and I think certainly the AASHTO community engaging is helpful for our leadership to see it as something valuable and important. Are there other questions? Jess?
I don't see any other questions. Denise, do you see anything?
Lori, you're on mute.
Thank you. So I do see another question here. How have you grown your communities of practice organically? Question mark, it's through targeted marketing, question mark. So Jez, I know you have worked hard on the communities of practice, and you too, Lenny, anything you could add to that, or anybody else on the call that would like to jump in?
So I can certainly address some of that. We built our community of practice at the Idaho Transportation Department. We began by reaching out to the people who actually manage the records or the data or the knowledge for their different work units. And we reached out to those individuals. We invited them into the community. We created a monthly standing meeting that people can join or not join. And then we used Yammer and Microsoft Teams as a way of sharing agenda items and resources with each other. And that's been really helpful. We have about 89 people across the state in that community of practice. But it really was us reaching out to build the community, and all of our resources are public for ITD employees. So we have the Yammer channel is shared with all company. The Microsoft team is the public team that people can navigate to and join or leave as appropriate. And we try to make it as transparent as possible. We've also put up posters and we've written articles for internal publications just to say, hey, if you are managing records or you're managing data or information or knowledge, we would love for you to join the community and get involved. And so that's some of the things that we did to help build it.
Another question around the communities of practice is, and I heard somebody, I'm not sure who stepped in, but if either of you want to talk to what platform you're being used, and I guess, Jez, you talked to the two of them, but any others that we might have out there is another question.
And this is Lenny, and I just, at WashDOT, communities of practice are starting to grow grassroots within the business areas right now, and I'm excited. And I know I've got a couple team members on that have been leading that, and yay, team. I will, two things I'll say. One is we have a lot of groups in our organizations, and we may perceive those as communities of practice, and they may function as a community of practice, but just to what I've encouraged people to do is think about what your purpose is. If it's a task, it might not be a community of practice so much as a task team, but also to think about who's allowed in the door. You know, because those are tools that can help with succession management if we allow people at different stages of their career to participate. And then, and oftentimes what we consider to be a current community of practice is more restrictive than that. And then the other, but they're going to be essential for our business domains. Those will essentially be communities of practice as we're developing those. And teams will be hopefully our tool of choice as we move forward at WashDOT. I am working with a team of people from other agencies in the state that are interested in information management, and we're struggling with what's the platform we can all commonly use, which is why we have a research NCHRP project that's underway for that topic.
So, and that leads into probably one of the last questions we have here, which is a technology question and asking, is SharePoint considered the most effective platform for knowledge sharing? If not, what do you recommend? So I can say we're a Google, we use Google at UDOT. We are a Google state. The whole state government is using Google Drive and every other, all those other applications that come with that. That being said, and I think Sandy would talk to this, we have experienced some frustration. It works really good within the teams because you can share files readily, but it's hard to share the knowledge across the organization. And the search function we find is a little bit challenging. I think I guess some love it and others not so much. So I'm not sure I would recommend wholeheartly that, but it's working for us today.
Well, and I think, go ahead, Lenny.
I think that you know, the tool isn't the solution. The tool is a tool. It's really a question of what are your business requirements and what do you have for resources that you can commonly work with. And it's a problem right now if we're trying to work sometimes within our organization, but often, but almost always across our organizations. And but it's really like SharePoint, it's how you curate the content and make sure that it's findable, searchable, usable to people. And you can do that in Google, you can do that in SharePoint, you could do it in Teams, but without some intent and strategy, it's going to become a junk room.
That's a great answer, Lenny. I love that answer.
And Sandy, was that you that was?
Okay, do we have any other final questions for today? We're a little over time.
Yeah, I'm like totally celebrating these 40 people that have hung on with us. Holy cow.
Yeah, so, well, I do want to thank you again for joining us today. I hope that you were able to get some things that you can take back to your organization. We do appreciate your time and your contributions. We know your time is precious. We do have 2 more webinars coming up, one in October and one in December, so definitely save the date. We're going to be talking all about communities of practice and information sharing in October, so that should be something that would be fun. So we're hoping to really have a lot of discussion questions and make that an interactive session in October. So do hope that you'll join us for that. Also, there's on the bottom of the screen, there is a website, and so definitely check that out for more information. And we hope to see you in October. Thank you very much, everybody. I appreciate you coming today.
Oh, no way.
All right, Denise is clearing out the room. I brought Victoria Sheehan into this group as well.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. Great job.
Thank you.
Hey, Victoria, thank you for hanging in there to the end.
It was
Yeah,
interesting a couple of times, but I got most of it.
Is there, I just saw an unanswered questions that they were hanging up. So I'm wondering if, can we see those unanswered questions?
Yeah, you should be able to see it on the question panel. Okay.
I am not seeing a question panel, so.
I know, I was really find it too, but.
All right, Denise has cleaned out the room, so cleared out the room, so.
There is not an unanswered question. I sent them all to
Okay.
you. The ones you saw just said thank you for Martin, and then Victoria Shan said thank you. Or
Yeah, it was Martin Krebs that I saw, so that's good to know. Thank you, Denise.
Mhm.
Yeah, my system kept just freaking out. So the whole little like viewer thing would disappear. So I never saw any questions if they were asked, and it was really odd. I kept getting notifications that my system was overloaded and to turn off the video. So, and that's probably related to our broadband issues here in Idaho. We don't have really super good broadband.
Actually, I was getting the same messages. So
yeah,
in the middle of my presentation, the whole screen went black.
Oh,
I thought I might have dropped the call. So anyway, it came back and I'm like, well, I guess I'm still on. So did I cut out?
No, you never would have guessed that you had a technical glitch.
Well, that's a real professional, not getting stymied by it, just keeping going.
Yeah, you did great.
Yeah, and
so
and I don't know why that one poll didn't populate. I'm not sure.
That very first one.
Yeah.
It said, I could see on the corner that it said that the results were hidden. So I think Victoria adjusted a setting and then it started to show up.
Yeah, I tried unhiding it, but it didn't show.
Yeah, I'm thinking it's because there were so many answers they could pick from. I think in the future we just need to go with 6 or less, because that one had like 10 responses.
Yeah.
Okay.
Hoping that we can see it inside of Menti. Let me make sure I logged out too. Yeah, and I went.
So,
geez, I know that.
Oh, no, you did it.
Yeah, I did.
Victoria Sheehan, how did it look from the from the participant side?
I never would have guessed you were having any of these technical issues. There was a couple of things you could tell you were struggling, but it was much smoother as a participant than it sounds it was for you all trying to present.
That's good to know. Thank you.
And then I kept hitting the return key because I'm used to forwarding slides that way. And then it would forward, but I wasn't sure I was forwarding the right thing. So that was a little odd.
Yeah, when
It
you're
wasn't
presenting,
perfect, but it wasn't as clunky as you're making it sound.
Right.
As a viewer, it all went pretty smoothly.
Right.
so when you're presenting, there is a box that allows you to see what the audience is seeing.
Yes. And I had that open, but I have 3 screens, and then I had the open PowerPoint on one, trying to read my notes from that, which were getting blocked, but I didn't want to flip down my laptop so I could read them. Like, oh no, what was I going to say there?
It's always so painful. That's why we're always apprehensive, because I can't think of many times that it's come off in a webinar environment without a hitch. So I think they were minor, but still, I'm always anticipating those.
So there was a lot of good information, and I think people will avail themselves of the PowerPoint. I guess the next step is for you all to clean up your notes and give me a unified file that I can put with the notes.
So, Lori, do you think that you could do that this week, or is that going to be a next week thing?
Oh yeah, no, I'm just going to delete all the notes and send it back to you. I'll do it right now as soon as we hang up, okay, so I don't get sidetracked. Okay, and if there are resources people can see that you want to, I have a file of resources to share. I was going to post on at least the member portion of the site. And some of them could be seen more broadly. They're not rocket science, but they're the very organic pieces, representations of things along the way. I've got that too, and I'll work on finishing it this week. I've got to do the budget stuff today, but tomorrow I think I can get back to this. Finish that up, and then I'll send you the final file. And Victoria Beal, is there a way to go to the poll itself?
Are you still logged in there?
I am, but I can log out if that's.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, I'll go in and see what I can figure out on that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because I'm curious who did participate, but it looked like we had 91 attendees was our high point. That was not the presenters, is that right? So we had 99 altogether.
I actually think it was 95.
Oh, wow. And then plus our 8 that were on the admin side. Cool. Right. Out of 144 that registered.
Right.
Well, that's good. That's a good turnout. And I register for a lot of things that I know I'm going to have to receive the recording of. One of my partners, I think, did the same, and he said, I'll listen to it on Friday because that's what I do on Fridays. So just catch up on webinars.
I do that a lot.
I found it interesting that John Milton signed in.
Yes. Well, and then
he's Lenny's boss.
Yeah, I was going to say, who's that?
Yeah. And then we had several from WashDOT. We had some people from the Data Governance Council. I'd shared it with them, and then the whole division I'm in, and a couple of the people from the division I'm in are trying. I imagine the community of practice question came from Yvette or Guy.
So Victoria Beal, we had a number of LTAP people signed in as well.
Great.
Cool. Yeah. So I think it went okay.
Oh,
I think it went great.
Good. Yeah,
right.
For me, the lesson out of this is I really need to sit down and write down some of this stuff. So when I'm retiring, I'm passing it on to somebody else, and that record might be helpful for others as I'm doing that. But I've been dying to clean up my files, and I never can get time. And this was just like, a get your shit together moment, Lenny.
So it's important for you to do that,
Lenny, that's
but
really
you should stop talking about retiring.
It's a case of practice.
Well, that can talk into giving me some money so I can do something, stabilize my salary. But
Lenny, that's really important, because for me, I know UDOT's done more, but it's not written down. Like, I don't know where. I looked everywhere. I had to go back through our transportation blogs and all kinds of things to try to find what we've done, and so it would be really helpful for those that come behind you.
Yeah, it's, and I encourage you to do it now rather than wait until you've got 17 years to catch up.
All
Yeah.
right, anything else good for the cause?
I just got into
Thanks,
Menti.
everybody, for the support.
I hit the icon and the results came up.
Ah,
Oh, cool. So we could see that
I
if you
got it.
shared.
Yep.
Oh,
Yeah. Do you want me to share my screen real quick?
yeah,
sure.
Make me presenter. I can share it and show you.
that'd be great. And while that's Denise is getting that set up, if there are any improvements we should think about for any after action reviews. So John asked me this morning about doing another after action review on the budget stuff we've been doing. So I was like, oh, cool, tools.
Yeah, it looks like the trick was we had to hide the image, the AASHTO image I'd put up there. And then all the results started showing up. So live and learn. But we
Yep.
can actually send this out with the PDF of the presentation. And the largest contingency was from the knowledge management.
Yeah. But we had agency administration, that's cool. And data management, that's cool. Human resources, that's great. Yeah, cool. Audit even, someone. Yeah, and I like the joint task force, I'm sure that some of the people on agency admin or knowledge management or data management or HR, maybe some connections with that. And I didn't try to connect to click to, but we probably had some dual representation.
Oh, always.
Mm-hmm. And one from outside the transportation sector. I wonder if that was one of the Washington agencies or not, or if that might have been Sandy as well. Is Sandy still on? She probably didn't know we were doing
She's
that.
not.
Yeah, so please extend my appreciation for her comments. That was really interesting to see. I'd love to read the report when it's available, if you're letting it go outside the department. I'd like to see the questions that she was asking people, because maybe I can do that in the next year as well. But cool stuff.
Yeah,
And Jez, you did a great job hosting this.
Yeah,
Thank
Jess.
you. That was excellent.
Sure, thank you. It was fun. I think I might have missed a bullet point or two. In order to see them on my tablet, which is where the webcam is, I had to make the Word the Word document giant. And so then I was like scrolling the document with my bullet point list of all the things I want to mention. And as soon as I was done, I was like, oh, I forgot to mention that. Oh, I forgot to mention that. So yeah, but
Nobody knows but you.
That's true.
Right.
That's true.
Right. Yeah, my lesson was it might be worth printing it out on paper just to have easier access to.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good idea. So.
Oh, well.
All right. Well, we flip the tables on you next time, right, Jez? You're presenting.
Yep, absolutely. I've got, really, I have a rough draft. And so what I would like to do actually is talk about a concept and then actually try and see if we can't get discussion, and then talk about a concept and do discussion. So I plan on talking a little bit, but then trying to brainstorm with the group and seeing if we can't get people asking questions and interacting and talking with each other. So that's kind of going to be my strategy for how I want to do this, to try and leverage more of the networking and the community building, you know, as an example of an on-the-fly community of practice.
And just
a great idea.
Have you heard of brain writing yet?
Have I heard of what?
Brain writing.
Brain writing, no.
I've only looked at one website about it, but it's a tool for like being able to do Post-it notes and whiteboarding together. And we're gonna do an exercise. We have a meeting set up in September. I can't believe it's already September. People are
right.
And but it's supposed to be a tool to help engage people when you're facilitating. So maybe that's something to look into as a way we could do Post-it notes with them. It's not a tool, it's a technique.
Oh yeah, sure. No, I would be very interested in learning more about that, because I would like to kind of flip the tables a little bit and be like, okay, so now you've heard me yammer on about something for 5 minutes. what do you think about this thing I've been talking about? What are your experiences, and how might you, run with a concept or an idea, and kind of have more of an open-ended discussion, hopefully. And then just say we have X number of minutes, and I just budget that into the presentation, that we have X number of minutes for this discussion. And then at the end, just say, great discussion. If it's still going on,